Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, a standards-based approach to benefits management, what BS202002 means for you and your business. This webinar is brought to you by the APM Benefits and Value SIG. I'm your host today. My name is Peter Rolstone. I'm a public sector project professional with a focus on introducing benefits management to public sector organisations at programme and portfolio level. I've been doing that for about 5 years or so. I'm currently the benefits lead for the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, which is part of Innovate UK. I am also the new secretary for the APM Benefits and Value SIG, having served on the committee for several years. So the new British standard on benefits management is currently out for consultation, and today the lead author and working group chair will canter through some of the key points and expand on some of the more controversial areas during this webinar. And Dr. Hugo Mini herded cats over the last 3 years to bring this standard to you, starting with a technical committee of more than 30 who pulled together a panel of 7 representing government and many industry sectors, and a year ago requested feedback from a federation of small businesses and a number of other employers and industry sector representatives. It's now been released for public consultations, which means that you can comment and change the course of the future. Hugo is the APM Benefits and Value SIG co-chair and a benefits management subject matter expert for Sellafield Limited. He's an accredited social value professional and a nuclear professional with the Nuclear Institute, as well as a chartered project professional and chartered manager. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to stop talking and to hand you over to Hugo.
Hello, I'm delighted that we have so many people joining us today. What we're talking about today is a standard that if you search for BS202002, you probably won't find anything. The reason you won't find anything is because it's published for consultation, not for it's not the final version. Having said that, the final version is not going to be very different from the version that goes out to public consultation. We take into account all the comments received. The version that you can read online today, I'm afraid it isn't available for download, it's just available online. The version that you can read online today is online so that you can put comments against it. And by putting comments against it, we then have to take into account all the comments. So I'm expecting 2,000 or 3,000 comments, maybe even 4,000 comments as a result of this webinar and as a result of other people looking at the standard. And I have the unenviable job of going through all those comments with the panel, saying what we're going to do about each one. And it looks like we have a huge range of people coming from different places, which is really quite exciting. I can see some whole countries in there, Scotland, Bangladesh, Singapore, but also all over the UK, many different cities in the UK. It's exciting how many different people are coming in, and we've had 78 responses. But what this also tells me is that you know how to use Mentimeter, which means that we can go on and get a lot of very valuable feedback that everybody gets to see throughout the presentation. Peter's already introduced me, so that's who I am. I'm not in my suit today because I don't wear a suit for going into Sellafield, because it's a working site, and we tend to wear polo shirts as I am today and do the work that needs to be done. So what are British standards? The next question I'm going to ask you, I'll set you up for it because it's the next slide, is how many of you currently use standards in your workplace? It's very important in project management. It's been shown that the more widespread the use of standards, the more likely projects are to succeed. And so it's worth saying there is a source of standards, British standards, which are created by industry experts with knowledge and experience. There's obviously another source, which is ISO, International Standards, ISO, International Standards Organization, as opposed to the British Standards Institute. There's probably no difference between them in the sense that ISO standards would be adopted by the British Standards Institute with whatever localization is necessary, and British standards that are written before there's an ISO standard on the subject would tend to become ISO standards. So I'm hoping the next step for the British standard on benefits management is to become an ISO standard, although the pace of these things means that it's probably 3 or 4 years away before it gets to that stage. Of course, that depends on you not saying this is completely unsuitable for publication, which you are fully entitled to do so during the comments phase. Do you use standards? I've seen that many people already know how to use Mentimeter. So if you'd like to answer, then we can start to see. It doesn't surprise me to see that the very first buttons coming up are every manager does it their own way. That is unfortunately very common. And this is why we're introducing it. Well, I will talk about it on the following slide. This is why we're introducing a British standard in benefits management. Yeah. Absolutely, there's a comment coming up there. Depends on what we mean by standards. What I mean by standards is, do we have any commitment, any policies that say we're going to do things a particular way throughout our organization? And by doing it that way, we will tend to get more consistent results. So it can be that you've decided to use lean and you're following a process for lean that is one of the ones that's published, tried and tested. It could be that that you have your own local version of which would be the every manager does it their own way. You have your own local version of project management, and it hasn't been tested in the market. It hasn't been tested in the bad times as well as the good times. What you find with the standard methodologies for project management is that they've been tested in good times and bad times, and they tend to keep being stable even during the bad times. Whereas homegrown ones, there must be a reason why you've chosen not to go with one of the tried and tested ones, and unfortunately there's a very good chance that that reason is results in ending up with something that serves you well when the sun's shining. And I'm just looking out at the sun shining now, and it doesn't always hold up. So yes, I'm glad to see more comments. Let's have a look at what does it mean to be compliant, because this obviously matters. When my panel is writing a standard on benefits management, what do we mean? Are we trying to say something new? Are we trying to come up with our own idea of where we want to go with standards, or are we saying this is what's current practice? So to give you an idea, what we said was a British standard should never say anything new. It should say things that are tried and tested that we know works. It should, as far as possible, or what we have done with our standard in particular, is we've gone out to companies that we know are doing benefits management well. Actually, we've gone out to a whole lot of organizations, whether they're doing it well or not, and said, how do you do it at the moment? And we'll come on to whether you're doing it well or not in the second half of this presentation, which is the 7 deadly sins that you shouldn't do in benefits management, where we're saying, okay, so these are the ways. So we've gone for the third of these options, in case you're wondering. We've gone for a range of ways. Most organizations that are doing benefits management reasonably will find themselves compliant with a standard that opens up a number of different ways to achieve the right result within certain principles. So let's carry on. And obviously variety within each one. Where does benefits management come from? We used to do it. I wrote a blog a few months ago on 1,000 years, or I think it was 1,000 years of benefits management. It might have been 900 years of benefits management, which showed that we've been doing benefits management for 900 years, right up until the 1920s when we introduced the iron triangle. Programs have been failing ever since, and now that we're going back to benefits management, we're bringing in a higher probability of project success. What came up out of that, what came out of the established practice as a separate discipline since the 1970s, was that because of the variety of approaches, it became time for a standard. So the British Standards Institute said, we think we put a proposal in to have a standard on benefits management. That was approved and the resources committed. And so we sat down as a panel and wrote one. And as I say, talked to lots of people. I'm particularly proud of this diagram. This now is a key diagram in the whole of the ISO 21500 series, which are portfolio, program and project management. And I'm particularly proud of it because it was the first time I'd ever commented on an international standard, and the diagram was just adopted and stuck straight in with almost no changes. Without the hugely emphasized benefits bit, it was the bit that was emphasized was the bit that was relevant to each one of that family of standards, different bits. But obviously, because we're talking about benefits management, this diagram, which is in the BS202002, is about benefits management. So the bit that's about that on this diagram that's emphasized is the bit that's relevant to the standard. So we often get asked what's a quick definition of a benefit, and what we're looking for is really something that says, why bother? A lot of organizations do benefits management purely as a tick box exercise rather than because it's going to make a difference to their organization. And we will come on to that in some of the 7 deadly sins. And it isn't, it's for a purpose. If it doesn't save more time than it uses, if it doesn't save more resource than it uses to do the benefits management, then you're not doing it right. So I've come up with a few definitions. A change that a stakeholder considers an improvement is the one broadly that's in the APM body of knowledge. But it's also an easy way to think of them is a progressive achievement of objectives. If you think of objectives as black and white, either we've achieved this or we haven't, then how can you see progress? And if you were to have, as some people do, sometimes you end up with a one-to-one relationship between benefits and objectives. I don't recommend it, but you may end up with that. Then you can say, we can see how far we're doing on this objective by how much progress we've made on this benefit. It's also, but the return needs to be measured in many different things. It can be measured in money, it can be measured in reputation, it can be measured in intellectual property, in market value, in satisfaction. And the investment is also measured in many different ways. It's not just in money, it might be in personnel who therefore can't work on other programs. When you're committing investment in to run a program or a project, then you're taking it away from other places. And some resources you might say are unconstrained. Some resources you have to look at and say they are constrained. And if you're taking a broader view, or if you're a big organization, then sometimes the resources that other people would think of as not constrained turn out to be constrained. Examples might be pollution in the atmosphere, where many organizations would say that's not really a big problem because we're so small. But there's obviously whole countries who say if we commit to, dare I be, political fracking, then we're creating a problem that will last many thousands of years. And it becomes an issue because of the scale that it's on. Here's another way to look at benefits. If we read from the right-hand side, starting with the objectives, then we say, okay, this is what we're trying to achieve. We've got these benefits that we're hoping to make that happen, where we can look at our objective, we can look at therefore what benefits do we need that will make it happen. We therefore say, okay, we're going to create this outcome as we move gradually across the screen. We're going to expect to see these outcomes, which will make sure our benefits happen. Therefore, we're going to do these things which result in these outputs. The outcomes are the change to the business. The outputs are the results of your project or program. If we do these outputs, then what changes do we expect to see? So we've gone from right to left. We're now going back again with a sanity check. If we do these, if we achieve these outputs, what changes to the business do we expect to see? What could go wrong? Right, we've resolved our outputs a little bit to get them to a point where they'll give us the outcomes that we want, the changes that we want to see in the business. What benefits and disbenefits are we likely to see as a result of those outcomes? Are we going to see the changes we want? Are we going to see the benefits we want? And what disbenefits are likely to occur? So if we then look at those benefits and disbenefits, has some disbenefit emerged through our thinking process? This is still the thinking process that is going to take away too much from our objectives, and do we need to go back from right to left? You will go through this process. This is a simple benefits map. So you will go through this process, right to left, left to right, many times in the course of the project or program. But what's important is to recognize that you should do as much planning up front as you can. That's not to say you can't retrofit. We have to retrofit benefits management to programs. We pick the example of where I work now, Sellafield, where programs can be 40 years. If we were waiting to only apply benefits management to new programs, then all the existing programs wouldn't get the challenge that they need from benefits management. So benefits management as a discipline, as a practice, involves quite a lot of working with, collaborating with other parts of the organization. Apart from anything else, the only people who actually deliver the change in the business, we, the program, don't deliver the change in the business. We, the program, nudge people towards the change, but the people have to want to be part of it. So change and change managers are very important to benefits management. Can't do without them, or can't do without us. Some people combine the two. Many change management job descriptions include a lot of work that is in practice benefits management. I need to point out that third bullet point, which is really important, that all the time we're working in context, and the context keeps changing. So in the case of, again, Sellafield, picking Sellafield as an extreme example, but an extreme example of what's going on everywhere else, our knowledge about how to deal with active waste keeps on improving. And as we look at the different options for doing it, we look at our existing programs and what we're doing at the moment, and we need to say, is it going to be better to go off in a different direction because of this new knowledge, or is it going to be better to keep on doing what we're doing because the new knowledge is not ready for more widespread use or something like that? I see another comment just appear, but and I think that's absolutely right. Infrastructure might be transformational. Infrastructure can be incremental. We picked the example of the motorways, which is one of my favorite examples. The motorways aren't what they were when they were built. The M1 has moved in Yorkshire. It's not even running the same route it was running, but they've got more lanes, they've got hard shoulders, they've got smart motorway signs to change variable speed limits and various other things added on. Temporary lanes and permanent lanes, they've got cross motorways that go in different directions. A lot of that's incremental rather than transformational. So yes, infrastructure might be transformational. The same applies in ICT, which is often seen as the soft side of project management. That even in ICT, a lot of the changes we've seen have been completely transformational of society. So back in the 50s, we all got on our bikes and went to work somewhere else apart from where we grew up. So we didn't have the family around us. We didn't have the grandparents around to look after kids. People suffered from loneliness. And then along came Facebook. And Facebook was a throwback to the time when we lived in a community. We rebuilt our community using technology. It wasn't new, it was old, but it was still transformational. And absolutely one of the key things about benefits management is providing the information to enable organizations to make decisions about where they're going next. This is an absolutely standard question that comes up in every presentation on benefits management. Who is responsible for realizing benefits? And I'm thinking we've got a program team, because I'm expecting most of the people here are project managers. We've got the various governance and hierarchy of the program team. And then we've got the people who are done to, if you like. I always like seeing the answers come into this particular question. And I can imagine that David and Peter are chuckling in the background as they see the answers come in. So I'm going to, you will see these results, and they always make interesting reading. I'm going to throw a bit of a challenge in here. As I said earlier, the program team can really only say, this is what we've given to you. We might have given you tools, we might have given you behavioral change, we might have given you a new road, but the benefits that are going to result, the program team can't actually do very much about them. If they've done their job right, then they can be held responsible for them, but it's actually the client or the business that has to make the change. The client or BAU is the bit that has to make the change that realize the benefits. And absolutely, there's a comment just popped up saying most people will see it as the program team. That is the problem. The program team don't engage enough for other people to realize that this is their change, the change they wanted. I was at a corporate briefing a few months back in Sellafield, where we have the frontline people, the people who are actually dealing with active product, who are making the world safer. And then we have the layers around them, the bits of the organization that support them directly, the bits of the organization that support the bits that support them directly, and then way on the outside are the people like ICT and management and reporting. And I was the only person there from that outer circle, and they said I was very brave for admitting I was from that outer circle. And then they launched into, why are you taking away our old applications and giving us new ones? We don't want all of this. And we aren't creating the benefits, they are creating the benefits. What we're doing is making it more likely that those benefits will come about, or we're delivering the tools for them to make the benefits happen. Obviously, with my brilliant diplomacy, they've changed their minds, and they now think we're doing them a bit more of a favor, but that wasn't the way it started out. So here's one of the bits in the British Standard that is going to be a little bit controversial. As I say, there is nothing in the British Standard that's new. Every bit of the British Standard is delivered at one or more organizations. So there are organizations that start with a portfolio, but for most organizations, they think benefits management is what you do after you've decided what you're going to do. Deadly sin number 2. So benefits management actually starts with the portfolio, with the enterprise. And if your organization doesn't have portfolios, that's fine. It's then your whole organization, or it might be your alliance, or it might be, it's at a level where you're making decisions about where you're going to go, what difference are you going to create in the world over a sustained period, rather than what difference are you going to make with a specific organization. So you're saying, right, we've got some objectives, what do we want to achieve? You're then saying, okay, for each of those objectives, what are they worth? If you don't have a value, if you decide this is mandatory, therefore we're going to do it and we don't need benefits, then I think my audience will probably agree it tends to be underfunded, because you haven't worked out what it's worth. You give it the minimum, and instead of taking 6 months, it takes 10 years because it was just underfunded all the way through. Having decided how much it's all worth, then you can say what combination of activities is going to get you there. And having decided what combination, you then want to know, are you going in the right direction? Which is the how are you measuring and how's it going? So if we take that to the next slide, another diagram from the British Standard. In this case, it's even got the figure number on it. Define the portfolio, which then leads to defining and clarifying the required benefits. And defining and clarifying the required benefits might show you that you didn't quite understand what you meant when you defined the portfolio. So there's a bit of feedback there. And then deliver the portfolio. And as you deliver the portfolio, you may feed back on the definition and say, this was an impossible ask, or we're going better, we can do better than that. Let's challenge the portfolio definition and make it even stronger. Within the benefits management bit of portfolio definition and portfolio delivery, we've got these three stages. The first, assessing benefits realization, is when we go back to our programs and projects and other activities and say, how are we doing? Identify the difference and then say, right, as a result of where we're going versus where we should be, what are we going to do about it? So that, what are we going to do about it, says, right, we've got some gaps. What gaps have we got? What are we going to change? And it's really important to emphasize this to all of the project managers and program managers. You don't get to decide what your program does. That's from the portfolio. You don't even get to decide whether it's going to change or not, because if another part of the portfolio, if another program has failed miserably, then the program portfolio leadership team is going to be looking across their portfolio to say, how do we fill that gap? And they might well say, you're a really successful project manager, you're doing yours really well, we're going to dump a whole lot more scope on you because we've got a gap to fill. In order to look at your programs, we have to retrofit benefits management into existing programs. As I say, again, perhaps I'm in an unusual situation, but some of these programs are quite long. Therefore, we need to retrofit, otherwise we're just going to have a huge gap in information. And obviously, as that brings down, as that trickles down, then we might well be saying, what do the actual program sponsor, the people who are providing the governance of the program team, need to do differently, if it needs to speed up or if it's failing hopelessly, and perhaps even what do you need to stop, regardless of if it thinks it can be justified by its own benefits. If the resources within the portfolio are needed for something else, then they may well need to stop it. And I think what that comes down to is that cycle that we looked at on the previous slide about what you do at the portfolio. You can go round that cycle 100 times in an hour portfolio leadership team meeting, where you say, right, what do we need to do differently? If we do something differently, how does that affect our forecast benefits? And maybe it was the wrong thing to do. Maybe we need to have another look before then starting to spend real time and money on real activities. Here's another figure. This one's on the program's life cycle. The reason for showing this, we'll come on to reverse engineering benefits, as again, that's deadly sin number 2. This shows the paragraphs in BS202002 defining the need or opportunity, which is pre-programmed largely, plan benefits and contribute to writing a business case. Bear in mind, we're saying, is this change worth doing and feasible to do? And once that's been decided, then how we're going to do it is defined by a program board through a business case. The business case will typically put forward a number of options. And then there'll be various changes throughout the life cycle of a program. And that's absolutely normal. Programs, the reason we have intelligent and clever project managers and wise project managers is because if programs didn't hit obstacles all the time, we wouldn't need them. Programs hit obstacles all the time, computers can't hack it. We have program managers to steer them around the obstacles. And then throughout a lot of the life of the project, we're monitoring benefits realization or the forecast for benefits realization using lead measures in order to make the changes, in order to understand the information clearly enough to make the necessary changes. So here's a reminder of what I said earlier. The program leadership team really makes the how decisions. I'm sure a lot of you will recognize your program steering board or your sponsor who is micromanaging you and interfering with your how decisions. When you start delivering what correctly, then they will get back in their box and let you make the how decisions, as long as you let them choose the what decisions. And then we come to the highest level, which is why we do it. And in many ways, benefits management is why we do projects. The enterprise makes the why decisions. So there you've got your sponsorship team, your portfolio team making, right, what needs to be done, what's the scope, and the program saying exactly how we're going to do it. Does that ring true for anyone? So this is perhaps the most important or most useful diagram in the whole British Standard. Whenever anybody wants a one-page summary of the British Standard, this is what I send them. And this is where, as you can see, address benefits variance spits out the defining or the scope of programs which might change during the life of a program, or whether we need to start something new, or actually whether we're going to shut something old down, and then says, how's that monitoring going for assessing benefits realization? What does it look like over the next 5 years? Are we on target for what we said we were going to be? And if we're not, then what's the difference, which is 7.4? What's the difference, and what are we going to do about it, which is 7.5? So there's a continual relationship between the portfolio and the program. And that applies to projects, tasks, studies, whatever units of portfolio you have, and actually to business as usual as well, because you have to decide how much money you're allocating to business as usual, and how much money you're allocating to change. And that depends on your external circumstances and your unique circumstances. There's no rule of thumb to say what's going to give you the optimum result. Now, everybody knows about benefits maps. I'm going to say something controversial about benefits maps. Well, I'm going to say some non-controversial things, which is they show cause and effect. They show whether an action is likely to lead to a benefit. They show that when the environment changes, whether it's the external environment, the priorities of the organization, the availability of resources, or the internal environment changes, whether your project managers won the lottery and decided to go to retire, then instead of saying, right, we have to look at every single aspect of this program, you can say, I'm following down the benefits map based on the change, and I can see which bits to put some real effort in to looking at, which bits need to change. They are useful. They are a tool for communication. They should be developed with stakeholders. But the controversial bit is, I believe, my panel believes, and all the people we've consulted believe that only 3 types of benefits maps are useful. So the one we saw on the previous slide is the Cassandra model, also sometimes known as the Cranfield model, benefits relationship network. It doesn't matter. There's plenty of variation in how you name the columns. That's absolutely fine. You can name them. You can have different numbers of columns. They're all encompassed with one type of benefits map. Another type that's useful is the results chain. I don't know how many people have used results chain. Results chain has one big advantage, that it's fractal, that you can look at it at different levels of detail easily. The Cassandra model is more difficult to change the level of detail, although I'm doing some work on finding a way to do that, to change the level of detail. And another thing I like about results chain is that you can put a timeline on it and it starts to look more like a Gantt chart. You can start to say, we can see when we need to do what, and we can see when the benefits appear from it. That works more on longer term projects with multiple intermediate states, interim blueprints than it does on projects that don't have intermediate states. And then the third type is the strategy Y model, which is essentially it's the same as the Cassandra model, only it does the right to left followed by the left to right. And that's often used for the delivery of, say, government policy or major enterprise strategy. But the Y model is only actually useful during the strategy development time. The moment the rubber hits the road, it's a little unwieldy. So looking across, only the first of these is the one we've already talked about. So I'm asking you which of these you use. Benefits maps, you can choose all of them if you use all of them. Benefits maps, benefits profiles, stakeholder engagement, like measures, lead measures, and dashboards. And we will have a look at some. There was a note up saying the conversations are more important than the outputs. I would say that the output record of the provide you with the support to filter. Wow, that was a lot of answers all coming in at once. It was rather exciting. It's really good to see a lot of people using so many of these artifacts to make benefits management work to make your organization successful. And seeing the relatively small proportion of lag measures isn't a surprise in the sense that a lot of organizations throw the results over the fence to business as usual, and it's not their problem anymore. And the lag measures obviously only come when you've handed it all over. So it isn't a surprise. Does that look interesting, that particular pattern? Yes, I'd absolutely agree. Being able to measure things. And here's a very, very useful comment. Simpler maps are very useful for communications. This is why what I'm trying to look at is how to see different levels of detail. So your engineers can very happily jump in there and go to the nth level of detail and tell us every single project they're doing and be heard, at the same time having something simple enough to communicate with. I'm going to quickly show you dashboards. I've realized I've talked too long and we've got less time for questions. So dashboards are useful for this decision making because they show this current and forecast position. It's different from a highlights report in that the highlights report shows what you want everybody else to see. What you tend to see on a highlights report is that there are some bits that are green. Those are the bits the program team has control over. There are some bits that are red. Those are the bits that it's someone else's fault. So in other words, the highlights report is often used as a political statement. So here are some dashboards. Here's a dashboard on knowledge management where we've got outputs showing how well they're doing against performance. We've got capabilities, which is a combination of outputs, but essentially a tool that's within the control of the project team. And then we've got where are we? Where do we think we are? Benefit status. Together with the contributing outcomes, where are we with those outcomes? And then the same thing illustrated over time, where periods are months, where we're saying when do we expect these things to occur, which is the brown line, and what actual numbers are we seeing, which are the blue boxes. The dotted blue line, something else. So those are some dashboards. This is on the one hand, this is where you go and comment on the benefits management standard if you want to write down that bit.ly. On the other hand, when you receive the set of slides, you will also see a clickable link at the end, which takes you through to the benefits management standard. So let's talk about 7 deadly sins. And as Peter said, it will be a little bit of a canter through, but they are deadly. They do eventually kill your project. It's well worth knowing what they are. Let's have a look at deadly sin number 1. This is where you say, we've decided to do this. Now get us a benefits team to go and justify the decision. And what I've put in yellow underneath is find the real reason for the decision. If it's for someone's promotion, then find a way to put it in as a note to say the biggest benefit is to so-and-so who's intended to get a promotion, and get it public. And then they can make a decision, because it might well be that the chief exec is going to dine out on it for the next 5 years, and the rest of the board think that that's a good thing. Maybe they didn't want them around, so they're very pleased if they're dining out. In some ways, this is my favorite. This is where a business case contains lots of benefits and says how wonderful everything is going to be, and then says, these are all the things we're going to do, and there's no explanation about how it will happen. And the benefits manager in this case really should be questioning the sanity, questioning the logic chain, the causality. I'm using a number of different terms to mean exactly the same thing. Logic chain and causality are essentially the same thing. To say, do we think that these activities will actually make this difference? And when we do these activities, do we think there'll be disbenefits coming out? Disbenefits are often ignored for all sorts of reasons, all sorts of psychological reasons, and we need to get beyond psychology. Here's something I mentioned earlier: mandatory programs don't have benefits. The usual result, well, there's a couple of examples from the NHS. One of them is in the last decade, hospitals have had 594 targets to hit, all of them mandatory, and therefore they concentrate on 3 and don't worry about the other 591. And recently, during the party conference, Jeremy Hunt said, when this trust said GPs should have to see a patient face-to-face within a fortnight, Jeremy Hunt, who I never thought I'd agree with, having worked for 20 years in the NHS, said GPs don't need more targets, they need more support. What you need to do is understand how much does it have to be done, put a value on. Then we can look at the rule of 7. The rule of 7 says if it's going to deliver 100 million worth of benefits, then it's worth looking at solutions that are in the region of 1/7 of that, or 14 million, rather than looking at the £100,000 solutions. Say, let's start with the 14 million pound solutions and see whether see where we are with the kind of solution we'd be looking at. So as an example, to deal with active waste from Sellafield, we're looking at a geological disposal facility, digging a big hole in the ground, because we know how much it's worth. Because of the value, we can also look at other solutions like fast breeder reactors to make the world, make the make the world a safer place, make the create a clean and safe environment for future generations, which is exactly why I'm there. You'll probably be familiar with this one. Every benefit can be used, or we have an enormously long payback period, which basically means that everything can be justified, and because everything can be justified, nothing's a priority. So all the decisions that are made for political reasons rather than because there's a justification for them. And it also means that you don't go back to your stakeholders and say, the only way this change is going to occur is if you change something. A good example is my blog on Crossrail, getting the benefits from Crossrail, where some organisations have put their own money in, and they obviously are going to change. Heathrow Airport has got itself a nice terminal for Crossrail and is putting shops all along the side. Various London boroughs, some of them have started zoning, a lot of them haven't. If they all get together and talk about it, then they will start looking at what changes can everybody do that makes things even better for everybody. There's a variation on the never never payback, which means that people are quite happy to put their name on things. Someone did say what you need is accountability, make sure people sign up. But actually, if there are no consequences, then they will sign up quite happily and not worry. and they still won't hold people to account, they still won't change. This is the most difficult to challenge because you're trying to change organizational policy and you're trying to change long-term policy. This is what the IPA is trying to do. Yeah, I'd agree with both of those comments that have just popped up. I think everybody can see the comments popping up. Money talks we've got there, focusing on financial benefits, but ignoring the consequences. And this is where we're back to the portfolio, where we're saying what your changes matter. Your changes matter in far more ways than simply financial. And it may affect prioritization within your project or program, even though you'll be saying, well, we're doing great. It's because you've affected someone else. I used to illustrate this with a balloon. I was working with a group of nurses who said, well, if we can do this, why don't we make this bit of our program streamlined? And I got my balloon and I blew it up and I said, what happens if I squeeze this bit? And they could see the bulge occurring somewhere else. And they all said, oh, okay, we will go back to our managers and we will go back to the level above our managers and say, this is what we're planning to do. This is what difference it's going to make for us. What are the consequences for anyone else before we just do it? So this is justifying a program in isolation, an investment in isolation, and really the benefits managers doing exactly the same as they were doing. And then we've got some not quite so deadly sins. The mandated solution that we're going to do all these other things with, and someone needs to pick through and work out what's mandatory and what isn't. The start button effect, the Windows start button. Anyone remember the start button that came with Windows, which looked like it was a brilliant way to get into things, but nobody could work out how to turn their computer off anymore, because why would you press start in order to press off? Had a huge knock-on effect. It had a huge knock-on effect on Microsoft's credibility as well as productivity in many organizations. People have actually, I haven't, but people have actually sat down and worked out the consequences of that start button. And I have no doubt that all the people on this course have been asked many times to simplify. You know, can we make it less complicated? Why are you doing it such a complicated way? And Einstein, I think it was, who said, simplify it as far as possible, but no further. We often simplify things until they're broken. We often assume we got it right. We often don't measure progress. We often say, that's too complicated, my first idea was the right one, and we don't say it might be a bit more nuanced. And I've noticed nuance as being quite an important word coming up in many of the comments. So you don't get many seconds to put in your email address if you would like to keep in touch on this. You're obviously going to have a link to go straight to the British Standard to make your comments on the British Standard directly anyway. What I would like you all to do is to comment on this, and throughout the questions and throughout, I'm offering another 15 minutes afterwards, throughout the question time afterwards, please feel free to add comments to this. This is free for all. Just put your comments up, which since there's your organization commit, and any other comments. And the slide that shows the clickable link that says this is how you get to the benefits management standard and so on will come when we send the slides out, rather than me showing it now, because if I show it now, then the comments stop, and the comments are really, really useful. Peter, over to you on questions.
Thank you very much for that, Hugo. We've had quite a few questions come through whilst you've been talking, and I'll run them through roughly in groups. So there's been a couple of questions about the standard itself, and one of them is quite straightforward. Do we need to be a member of the APM to access and comment on the standard?
So the standard has a sign-in, but that is a sign-in for people to log in, to create a guest account. That's so that your name can be attached to any comments. And so if we don't understand a comment, we can come back to you. You create that. You don't, it's nothing to do with APM. The British Standards Institute is not to do with APM. APM's a corporate member, a corporate contributor to the portfolios, programs and projects work technical committee. I keep forgetting the names. They have technical committees and working groups. I used to call them committees and panels, but I've been told that's wrong on ISO standards. There we go. So when you click the link, you will be asked to log in. It's highly likely that you haven't already got an account for commenting with BSI, but you just create one on the spot.
Fabulous, thank you. And in more kind of detail, how will the new standard relate to existing kind of ISO standards, like the several guides on project management and program management? How will that relationship work?
Ties in. This is the ISO 21500 is the series on programs, projects and portfolios. It will, when it becomes an ISO standard, I would expect it to get one of the ISO 21500 numbers as an ISO standard. As a British standard, the standard's not quite, the numbering's not quite as rational. It's just sequential. Whichever standard comes out, whenever it comes out, it gets the next number in the line. No, when it's agreed that we will work on it, it gets the next number in the line. So there's another standard that's 2120001, which is a program, projects and portfolios standard, but hasn't quite reached the point of public consultation. So the number does go out of sequence, but not by very much. We have made sure that it is compatible with the 21500 series and with all other standards. One of the reasons for mentioning that I'm a social value practitioner is that there are quite a few references to the social value standard, whose number I've forgotten. Normally it trips off my tongue, but I've forgotten it now. And it's completely compatible. And I wrote an APM book that was compatible with social value and sent it off to the author of the social value, the previous chief exec of Social Value, International Social Value UK, and he endorsed it and said, yes, this is completely compliant. So very much a believer in tying in with what's already there.
Excellent, thank you. And as a follow-on to that, does the new standard differ or align with kind of existing best practice methodologies, like, for example, the APMG managing benefits certification? Have you kind of aligned with those as well?
We took those into account. What APMG's managing benefits does is it addresses step 2 of the program benefits management process. So it really takes a very small slice. You can say, oh, but it tells you you've got to continue to monitor. It doesn't say you do anything with what you've monitored. It doesn't say you use it to make decisions. It basically says, once you've been told what you've got to do, this is how you go about working out what the benefits are, so you can make a business case. And it doesn't address the portfolio level. There's a whole lot that it concentrates on one small area. So yes, we recognize that. Yes, we recognize that MSP has a whole lot about benefits management. And actually, on the whole, the British standard aligns quite well with MSP. But we don't say these steps are the steps you need to do, because we're saying there's principles behind benefits management, and there are a number of different ways to do it and still come out with a good result. So we're not taking away from being able to do it by the methods that you're used to. We're just saying you really do need to be aware of the context.
Excellent, thank you. And we've had a couple of questions around stakeholder engagement. One is kind of asking, is it not a given that stakeholder engagement is high, given that benefits are for them, for the stakeholders? And then that's kind of, there's a subsequent question around asking for advice for making stakeholders realize benefits rather than objectives. So there's a, is stakeholder management just not something that happens anyway, and then a request for advice on kind of managing stakeholders?
I think if this was in chat and someone put up, doesn't stakeholder engagement happen anyway, the answers would be amusing. No, there's an awful lot of benefits plans drawn up in a dark room in isolation, often by a single person with no stakeholder engagement at all. And that's not just in organizations I've worked in, that's in organizations where I've spoken to people where they work. That's pretty universal. Where we have got stakeholder engagement, very often the first ideas that came out of the program team are shown to have certain flaws. So no, stakeholder engagement is nothing like as widespread as it should be. It's one of the key principles. You cannot say you're doing social value, for example, unless you're doing stakeholder engagement before you even start, which is one of the reasons why I refer back to social value so often. It's a really well thought out process. Remind me, what was the second half, the other question?
It was for advice on kind of how to, bear with me, I'm just going to find it. Advice for making stakeholders realise benefits rather than objectives. Right.
That was one of the reasons for a possible definition being the progressive realisation of objectives. One of the short definitions I had. That's an easy way to explain to people, this is why we're talking benefits. You've got an objective, you want to do your work more efficiently. We're saying that we can measure how you're doing your work more efficiently by saying, are you getting your Sunday afternoons to spend with your family, as I used to campaign for when I used to run a GP federation. Are you getting your work breaks when you're supposed to get your work breaks? Therefore, we can conclude, therefore, that your work is being done efficiently. It's delivering advantages to you. Rather than that kind of woolly, we're doing things better, but we haven't actually defined what better is. So use benefits management as a tool to achieve what you always knew was common sense, in spite of the corporate gobbledygook.
Yeah. Whilst you're looking at Sarah Earls put in a comment about stakeholder engagement, which is worth kind of, I think, drawing out here, which is that once you start engaging stakeholders and they realise that they have at least partial responsibility for realising benefits, that can kind of have an effect of disengaging them. So there's an art to kind of stakeholder engagement and kind of keeping people with you and kind of giving them that responsibility.
Yes, one of the examples I give from Sellafield is that the executive are talking about saving money. How can we save money? And I keep on saying that's not highly motivating. We should be focused on advancing the mission, which is, instead of delivering in 98 years, can we deliver in 96 years? Our clean and safe environment. That's far more motivating. So a lot of it is finding benefits that people care about, that they want to deliver. Again, coming back to these nurses in Hull, they would quite happily at the end of the week fill in the form that said, what have we done, and make it up because they couldn't remember, because it was unimportant to them, until we determined what was important to them. And once we knew what was important to them, it didn't matter how difficult it was to measure, because they wanted to know the answer. So there's the smoking cessation team who said, at the moment we measure how many people come through our services, and we put 1,500 people through this February. And I said, great, how does that compare with last year? Well, actually, it's about the same. And I then said, and were they the same people? And they paused and they looked at me and they said, okay, we want to be measured on how many smokers there are in the population from now on. And that's the real difference. It was important to them. They didn't mind that it was a lot of work. It was important to them. They cared. And that's the conversations you need to have with stakeholders. They will make anything happen if they care. And most people are here to do a good job.
Yes. Thank you. Moving on to a different part of kind of benefits management. We've had a question about benefits maps, and I'll kind of give you the full context before the question. So the comment is that sort of one issue with many benefits maps is that they are incomplete. They show only the expected cause-effect parts, and they rarely show the prerequisites and the assumptions necessary to make the cause-effect valid. So the question is, will the new standard address this?
It doesn't, unless you add that as a comment. It's mainly a problem of just how much you can fit onto a sheet of paper. One of the things I'm trying to get done, I'm working with a software manufacturer or software developer on this. One of the bits is different levels of detail on a benefits map. That's hard work. But another is different bits of detail so that you'd be able to put your assumptions and your dependencies, external dependencies, onto your benefits map, and you'd be able to either see them, show them, or not show them. And if it's a dependency on another external program, you'd be able to see how that program was performing against whether it was going to be ready on time. And the difficulty is that you can make benefits maps immensely complicated by putting too much on, and they cease to be a communications tool. What we really need is some way to kind of turn layers on and off. But then if you turn layers on and off, you then need to move everything around so it doesn't overlap. So it really needs a specialist tool, and there is one that I'm working with. We haven't got to that point yet, and we're actually trying to work out the sheer conceptual difficulties of how do I say that this detailed benefit or this detailed outcome is a part of that at level 3 and that overall one at level 1 in order to show the different levels of detail. So yeah, I agree that one of the problems is they don't show the assumptions. What you should have in your profile is a section for assumptions where you list them.
Yes.
Obviously, if you've got the information there, then we can put it on a benefits map. If you haven't got the information recorded anywhere, it's more difficult to put on.
And that's an important part of kind of remembering that these are a kind of a group of documentation that help, and tools and techniques that all together give you that full picture. It's not all contained in one. Yeah, that's really helpful. And then perhaps this could be our last one. We'll see how many more come in. The kind of general questions like, when does kind of benefits management start for a project, and actually when does it end? And maybe we could expand that out into programs and portfolios as well.
Yep, so benefits management starts when you decide where does my organization want to be in 5 years time, 1 year time, 5 years time, 10 years time, 20 years time. That's when you define, that's when you start defining your strategy. And in the course of defining your strategy, you're saying why do we want this? How valuable is this? Why are we going in this direction? Because if you have strategic objectives that score less than, say, 3 on a scale of 1 to 5, why are they your strategic objectives? But if you don't ask the question, how important is this, then you might have a whole lot of strategic objectives that are really not very important. So that's when benefits management starts for an enterprise, and that then dictates the if you have portfolios, if you have multiple portfolios, that then dictates what's in the portfolio mix of benefits. And it's the portfolio that then says, okay, we've identified a gap between where we want to be on benefits realization and where we think we're going to be on benefits realization, and therefore we need to do something about it. In other words, programs don't start themselves. They don't say, I've had a brilliant idea, let's go and do it. Programs are as a result of gaps identified. Far too often what we have is programs that they shoot first and then name your target. What we need is to do something. Let's go and do something. Right, we need to justify it. Let's get a team of people to come and put together a business case to justify it so that we can spend the money. And it should be working the other way around. Benefits management should be part of strategy development, and then should be part of identifying the gaps, because once you've worked out how much everything's worth, you've then got to say, how far are we along that line and what's our trajectory, before you can start saying, do we have any gaps? And you can't say how far are we along that line and what's our trajectory if you haven't got some measures to say, actually, we've sorted that one. We've got that as a strategic objective, but we've sorted it. So we don't actually need some brand new things to make that happen, because it's already happened. Let's concentrate on the ones with the gaps. So yeah, that's where benefits management starts, well before the project is even a twinkle in someone's eye. It ends at an appropriate time when you've delivered some outcomes, or it ends for a program or project. It ends when you are confident that you will get the benefits that you said you would. So you don't have to keep measuring till you've got the benefits. You have to measure till you've reached the point where you are confident. That's another thing about benefits. How long do you measure before you say the benefits can't be attributed to this project? And that's when we're saying, for example, we're rolling out Wi-Fi across our site, across our production areas, and it's fraught with difficulty, of course. It's fraught with cybersecurity issues, and it's fraught with thick walls issues. Where do you place the broadcast hubs to make sure you can reach everywhere? And we're saying, great, so how long is it? They said, oh, great, we can measure the benefits and we can put 10 years on. And I said, well, how long before the technology is replaced? Well, the next technology will probably be 5G and we'll probably replace it. And we'll probably put that in 4 years' time. Right, so none of the benefits for Wi-Fi can extend beyond 4 years because it won't be Wi-Fi that's delivering those benefits. Sure, there's loads of benefits from not being tethered on wires. If you put a robot dog in there, for example, having a Wi-Fi signal means that you can keep track on it rather than it having to drag a cable, which can get tangled around things. But that could equally apply to 5G as it does to Wi-Fi. So you have to say, right, we've got the Wi-Fi solution, but we're giving it a life of this much. If we look at the motorways again, coming back to the motorways, how long do we attribute to the motorways, and at what point do we have to say that business growth can no longer be attributed to the motorways because it's just too long? It's dependent on too many other things. And another thing that social value does is it has an attribution, and the attribution works essentially by saying, what is the total attribution attributable to everything else? And therefore what's left is what's attributable to this project. So rather than getting into bun fights, you get this much and you get this much, it simply says what's attributable to everything else, 75% or whatever. That only leaves this much attribution to us.
That's really helpful, thank you. We've got two other questions. They're slightly different. I think they will take us through to the end, I suspect. And the first one's really interesting, I think. Are risks considered within the standard, or are they treated separately in other standards?
Risks are in other standards. I can't name a number for the risk management standard, but there is one. I'm not sure if it's a European one rather than the British one, risk management, but it would be applied in Britain, so there would be a ISO BS equivalent for risk management. We recognize risks. We talk about risks as 3 levels of risks that should be recognized in an organization, in the change side of an organization. At the broadest level, there's risks to the organization, reputational risks, environmental risks where the context changes, where the bottom falls out of the market, program delivery risks, where you're doing all this stuff, but it might not work. Your bridge might fall down. And then benefits risks, assuming that everything else worked. What are the risks that the benefits don't get realized? So we address that third one, and that third one is relatively less important. And I have to keep saying about benefits management, it's not the destination, it's the lighthouse that points you towards the destination and keeps you off the worst of the rocks.
Thank you very much. On a completely different topic, there are several benefits realization software tools around. I know you've kind of half talked about this. Are the BSI group looking for partners with that?
A BSI group doesn't have that kind of a relationship. APM might, various other organizations might. I am certainly happy to hear from software companies to find out what's out there. And one of the other links on the last slide of this presentation that you'll be receiving the slides of is to my guide to benefits management frameworks, which lists a number of different software solutions for benefits management in it. I would love to update that list and be more comprehensive. If people are able to get in touch with me, we'd be interested in saying this is the general approach, or this is how we take it forward. But British Standards doesn't partner up with software companies. as far as I'm aware.
And is the hope then actually that the people that do provide the software would align themselves with the standard? Is it hoped that it would work that way instead? Okay.
I think they'll find it takes a lot of headaches away. For them, it means that instead of having to say, learn how to do benefits management our way, which is quite a big barrier to adoption, they say we're compliant with the British standard, so that the people adopting it can say, well, we're compliant with the British standard, therefore we're confident that your software is the right stuff for us. But don't just say it, do read the standard and check whether you think you will be aligned with the standard.
Excellent. We're about 1:15, and we are through pretty much all of the questions that we've received. There have been lots of comments that we've received thanking you very much for the webinar. It's been very helpful. Lots of people who have appreciated being part of this and hearing what you've got to say. I think this is probably a good place to end it. Thank you, Hugo, for a fascinating presentation as always, and for the excellent questions that we've had through and the engagement through both the comments on Menti and through the the GoWebinar questions and chat. Thank you very much for that. As I said, please keep in touch. We'll send through the slides and I believe a recording after this session.
Yes,
thank you for joining us.
We'll attach the slides and recording to the web page. At some point in the near future, I will write a kind of recap, which will then replace the current web page. But basically, everything should be findable will be findable on the APM website. But just because you look tomorrow and see the slides and recording there and don't think it's done, you may find in another week that some of the text has changed.
Yes. Feel free to join the SIG if you wish. We're always looking for more people to come along and join in with our engagement with benefits and value management. Thank you, Hugo, for your time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I think that's a good place to say have a good day, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.